You're listening to Out of the Box with Rosie Tran. Out of the Box is sponsored by hugmetease.com. Hugmetease.com, spread love, give a hug, hugmetease.com. If you like us, then you can go on Stitcher, iTunes, and now we're on SoundCloud, and subscribe, follow us, leave a comment. We also have a support page on outoftheboxpodcast.com, and you can check out our affiliates, and that helps us out a lot. I am here today with Tom Peter. He is a journalist that covers the Middle East. He's written for Al Jazeera America and also Christian Science Monitor. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing terrific. How are you?
I am great. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today and talk about some of your crazy experiences covering the Middle East.
Sure. Yeah, I'm always happy to chat about that.
So I know that you were kidnapped actually while covering Syria. Let's start with that because that's something that, maybe we're not exposed to over here, the mainstream. I know being a journalist, it's getting tougher and tougher, and we kind of don't hear those stories in the mainstream.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that happened back in November of 2012. So I was doing a lot of work inside Syria at that time. And the northern border was open. So like a lot of people don't realize this, but you could the opposition controls the border crossing, so that you could just show up and cross the border. So it was kind of a wild time. Anyone would go there. I think that's something a lot of people. It's a misconception. They think you have to have like some kind of super secret passport or visa, but yeah, you can just go. I mean, it's crazy. There was one day where
could I fly to like Turkey and then just walk over like me?
Yeah, you could go to you could do it as long as you had a valid passport. It would be no problem.
I wouldn't need any type of government clearances or anything.
No, yeah, that's people always talk about like, oh, you're an American, like, how are you allowed to go to these places like Yemen or Afghanistan or Syria? And it's like, yeah, no, as long as you get a visa, anyone can go. The U.S. can't stop you from traveling anywhere. So
you don't get flagged these certain countries, they don't flag you and put you on, like the terrorist watch list or something like that. Like, why is this American going to these, war-torn countries?
Well, certainly coming back, they might have a conversation with you, but leaving is no problem. Coming back, there's only actually... I spent 7 years in the Middle East, and there's only actually been one time where they stopped to talk to me when I came back. Apparently it's harder than you might think to get on the radar of the government.
So you were on the border, you were going back and forth, traveling.
And so, I on the day that I got kidnapped, I was doing some work looking at an area where, at the time, the lines would change a lot. So there was an area that had just been recaptured by the opposition. And so some fighters invited us to come see the gain and all that stuff, which is quite common. So, we drove out, me and a couple of other reporters, Western reporters, and we got in like a flatbed truck with some, fighters, and we drive out to this kind of hospital that they had just captured, and they show us around and then said, okay, well, we're going to go assault this village and you can come with us if you want. Totally cool if you don't want to. And we looked and it was just like, you don't need to know much about the military or like tactics. No, it would have been a horrible idea. Like they were going to start at the bottom of a hill and then work their way up through this kind of government controlled village. Like the guy, we found out later that the guy who drove us over there ended up getting killed by a sniper, and
oh my gosh,
he was really a mess. Yeah. So we were glad that. So yeah, we didn't do that. So we said, okay, no thanks. I said, all right, well.
No. Now you say they said no thanks. You said this. Do you speak Arabic, Tom?
I do speak Arabic. And there was also one of the reporters I was traveling with that had an interpreter with him, so that also helped us a lot. So, but I do speak Arabic actually.
Did you study Arabic in school, or was it just from being over there and covering everything and picking things up left and right because you're constantly there?
Well, I did study Arabic in college, but really most of what I learned is from being over there, just conversation and stuff. And most Arabic programs in the U.S. are just awful. Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah. So most of what I've learned is just from talking to people.
Okay, so you're talking back and forth, and
so we're driving back, and one of the guys offered to drive us back, so we all crammed into this little like Toyota, and we're driving back, and out of nowhere, it was this car screeches in front of us and stops, and a group of guys with kind of masks and scarves covering their face. All jump out and surround us, and they've all got AK-47, assault rifles, and it was a very odd moment where it just was, you've seen, or I've seen so many scenes like that in like action movies or something, where it was just like a textbook abduction, and it was so it's just this surreal experience where you're thinking like, what, this is not happening.
So when you watch the films before and you're like, that's so unrealistic, that's such a stereotype, and now that you've lived it, you're like, that's so realistic. That's so how they do it.
It's crazy. So this is but it was but once we kind of realized what was happening, I mean, it was really terrifying, because there was at the time there was a lot of like pro-government militias, and a few months prior they'd had a similar situation where there was a Japanese journalist, and she just got gunned down by a random group of guys. So there was a moment where we thought, okay, like, I was thinking, okay, this is it. They're just going to gun us down and leave us in the middle of Aleppo. And then they ended up kind of dragging out the driver of our car, and they threw him into theirs. And then one of their guys got into our car, and then they were, following right behind us. So at that point, I thought, okay, like, most of my experience, or a large portion, has been in Iraq. And if you get kidnapped in Iraq and something like that happens, like, you're probably going to go somewhere, make a video, and then get like your head cut off with a bread knife. So I thought, okay, like that's it.
A very, very dull bread knife.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've watched any of the beheading videos, like
they're scary. They're scary.
Yeah, and it's like an awful way to go.
Did you have a bag over your head, or like a burlap sack, or you were able to see what was going on?
No, we could see what was going on. And so, I mean, my thought was, okay, like, if we're going to get like beheaded with a dull bread knife or something, I'd rather be killed, trying to run away or something. So I was thinking about trying to escape, but it was just impossible. I was sitting in the middle. There's a person on either side of me, and on top of that, like, we're driving at high speeds, and there was another car following right behind us with all of their guys. So it was just, there was really nowhere to go, and so eventually,
you say all of this so nonchalantly, like, oh yeah, I got kidnapped and this and that. Was there a lot of processing? Like, were you just you're saying, well, I was thinking of this, were you just in panic mode, or were you actually pretty calm because of the surrealness of what was going on?
I mean, I would say that you kind of went, initially there was kind of shock, and then kind of as I was thinking about escaping, it was, I guess I would say it wasn't like full on panic, but it was certainly close. And then when I kind of realized that there was nothing that we could do, it was just kind of this cold acceptance of like, okay, this is it. I've made a terrible mistake, and I remember having this thought where I thought, okay, like this is it. Like I've been really, really careless with my life. I'm at the time I was 30 years old, and I thought, okay, this is how I'm going to die. Like, and I had so much other shit that I want to do. Like, I've just really wasted my life. And so it's just kind of this cold acceptance where you think, okay, I'm just, I'll see what I can do, but there's really not much. I mean, I just didn't, none of us had a lot of agency. It was just kind of, you had to kind of be calm and just see where it would go. So, I mean, they took us eventually to this kind of base that they had, which was like in an apartment. And, at that point we started to realize that maybe it wasn't as bad. There was two women with us, and they were in the front seat when this happened. And they
were two kidnappers, not.
No, they were
being kidnapped.
These were two reporters.
Oh, okay. So they were being kidnapped as well. Okay.
Yeah, and they they at one point started to weep, and when that happened, the guy who was driving, I guess he thought maybe like, I've come on too strong or something, and was like,
he kind of felt bad.
Yeah, he kind of felt bad. And he was like, listen, this isn't what you think it is. And we're like, okay, I'm not sure what you wanted this to be like when you
This is
kidnap.
not the kidnapping that you think it is, guys. This is a kidnapping light. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Don't cry, please, reporters.
yeah, and so we got there, and at that point they started to kind of ease up a little bit, and so they once we got there, like they let us get out of the car. No one was like binding our hands or pushing us around. They just said like, please kind of motion for us to go inside. And, at that point, that's a good sign. Because, if you're, if they start putting the hoods over your head or kind of roughing you up, it's probably not going to work out so well. But they took us inside and kind of explained that they asked us a lot of questions. There were some of us who had cameras. They didn't delete pictures, which was, again, a positive sign. They didn't take our phones, which was also a very positive sign. So it was starting to kind of. Then they let us eat lunch, and
I'm sorry to be so flippant.
Yeah.
I know this is a traumatic experience for you, and obviously you're alive to live to the tale. But I just have this image, and maybe it's just because I'm a comedian. And you're saying things are looking up of, you have your phone and you guys are taking pictures like selfies with the kidnappers. And you're just like, we're fine. We're over here Instagramming from inside the base.
Yeah, no, there was no selfies with them. It was still like
it was still scary, but it wasn't as scary as you thought.
Yeah, well, at one point they came in and they brought us like this special kind of like herbal tea, and they're like, "Listen, we know that you've had a really stressful afternoon, so
these are the nicest kidnappers I've ever heard of."
yeah, they were like, have some tea, like just have some tea with us. This is like a special kind of tea. This isn't just like Lipton Black or some kind of generic green tea. This is like a special herbal tea. We put some extra.
Was it like a hallucinogenic?
No. Well, these guys were like they were. I'm not sure what group they were from. If I was a betting man, I think they were from a group called Ahrar al-Shams, which is like they're not like some of the hardcore guys, but they are like very conservative Islamists. So like these guys are not like, this is if you are into like drugs or like kind of Hunter S. Thompson-esque experiences, like covering the Middle East is not for you. Yeah, that's like this is not where like people go get drugged out. Like most of the like in the Middle East, like a lot of the places where you go hang out with men, like like in the U.S., like you go to like bars or I don't know, you have beers or alcohol or something, and over there, like there's a lot of times where I'd go to like sweet shops with guys, and we'd go out and we'd have like Arab sweets together and like drink tea from these like tiny little glasses, and that's like what these very macho guys do. So it's not
that sounds so dainty.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice. It's so yeah, I mean it's but yeah, so there was no we weren't getting high or doing any kind of crazy things with these guys, and they eventually they claimed that the guy who was driving us was trying to kidnap us, and that they somehow had a problem with him, which I think is just bogus. I'm not sure what it was, but either way, they claimed that there'd been some kind of misunderstanding, and they ended up holding us for probably like 6 hours, and then they said, okay, we'll let you go. And I guess to make up for it or something, they said, okay, yeah, and we just want to show you, like, in good faith, you've ever want, like, we're planning some big operations in the coming weeks. So if you want to come with us and, like, watch us in action, you're welcome. Like, when we go, attack government checkpoint, you can come with us. And so like, okay, well, thank you. Then then they drove us. We stopped at like a little coffee stand and had some espressos, and then they dropped us off at this like kind of hospital in the center of downtown.
That sounds like a very pleasant experience, except for the near death part where you thought you were going to die.
Yeah. Well, and like the other thing that's really stressful about these kinds of things is that like you hear stories from people who've been kidnapped. This in the like on the scale of kidnappings, like this is like really low. This wasn't. It could have been a lot worse. And one of the things that you hear though is that when people initially get taken, they're given to kind of the people who are taking care of you initially are like really friendly and nice, and then you get passed over to like some hardcore group that is going to be really rough with you or execute you. So, it can
go south. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, even though they were being nice to us and like giving us herbal tea and stuff, like generally speaking, I think all of us realized that it was going to work out all right for us. But it was pretty hard to kind of let our guard down until.
Of course, you're getting kidnapped. They've got AK-47s. You're in a foreign country. It's totally understandable. I'm glad that it had a happy ending for you. I know that's not the case for all journalists. How dangerous do you think it is covering the Middle East as an independent journalist? You're not backed by a corporate entity, are you?
No, I mean, I think that's, something that's oftentimes misunderstood by a lot of people on all sides of the equation is that the way that the media industry operates now is that they don't have those large budgets that they used to even just 10 years ago. So increasingly what you're seeing happen is they'll rely on freelance journalists. People like myself, I was on contract with the Christian Science Monitor. But I still had to pay a lot of my own expenses. But even then, the Monitor did do a fairly decent job of picking up the tab. But a lot of people will go in, and the calculus is that you're going to sell enough stories to cover your expenses, and then hopefully make enough on top of that that you have a profit of some kind. But that means that you're probably going to do things as cheaply as possible, which means that you're probably not going to do things in the safest way possible. So there's particularly, you'll see this happen a lot with younger journalists who are just getting into it. And they'll be really, really, really reckless and skimp on safety. Like, for example, they might not buy body armor. Which is a crazy thing not to have in a place where you have indiscriminate shelling and bombing. Do you
wear body armor whenever you go to cover a story?
I mean, it's different from place to place. In Aleppo, I would wear it whenever I was outside. And certainly it's easy to get complacent because it's not like, you're at the front lines all the time where people are shooting at you. But, I was in one situation where I was at a demonstration probably 50 plus miles away from the nearest front line where people were, fighting and shooting at each other. And out of nowhere, it got bombed by a government jet. And, so it goes from this kind of like very peaceful, happy situation to, where we probably had about 2 minutes of warning. A jet's coming and bombing, and then it was strafing survivors. And in a situation like that, I mean, you can imagine that it would be very easy to say, well, I don't need body armor. I'm not at the front. But it's, it doesn't look like it's dangerous, but it could be dangerous at any moment. Yeah, exactly. And, and it really can save your life and all those things. But, then there's other times where wearing body armor might make you stand out in a way that when you're trying to kind of be incognito. So some people might opt not to wear it so they can kind of be more low profile. But I mean, there's each story that you work on would have a different set of safety calculations.
And just so the listeners know, I've worn the body armor and it's extremely heavy.
Yeah. Oh, it's awful, particularly in the summertime because as you can imagine,
it's like 110 degrees.
Yeah, like it doesn't breathe. Like you smell awful, and it's terrible.
And I am not going to say my weight on the air, but I think the body armor weighed about half of me, so I was like exhausted walking a block.
Yeah, no, it's awful. Well, if you're looking to lose weight, like that,
it's a good workout.
Yeah, like a lot of correspondents or like I even see military do it as well. Like you can put it on, and if there's like a stairwell, you can go up and down the stairwell wearing your body. Oh my
gosh!
It's good. It's good workout.
So is that the most dangerous event that happened to you there being kidnapped, or are there other instances? I mean, that sounds like a pretty friendly kidnapping, not to diminish your experience. Were there other experiences that you had covering the Middle East after all these years where you just really were put in a dangerous situation?
I mean, yeah, I guess I've done. I don't know. I mean, it's. I don't think any people like to kind of, I don't know, keep track of war stories or anything like that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time in different war zones. I mean, I've been in small convoys with the military that have been, IED or hit with a roadside bomb where the truck right in front of you or right behind you gets blown up about, I don't know, more than 20 times probably. I've almost been shot a number of times. I got put in prison in Iraq in 2004 for 3 days.
Whoa! What happened?
That was, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but I mean, that was the short version is that in 2004, I was in college at the time, actually, and I was studying abroad in Egypt. And I decided that I was going to go over into Iraq because we had this like 6-week long winter break. The war had started 9 months ago, and I'd heard that it was possible. So I was like, I'm going to go and just check it out, see what's happening. And, this was like, I guess I should contextualize and say, like, this was like, the end of 2003, beginning of 2004. Like, it was kind of like this eye of the storm, and it wasn't like things hadn't gone completely crazy yet. So there also hadn't been any major kidnapping. So it's not as crazy as it sounds. But so I went over there and, I had this idea that I was going to like work as a journalist, but I hadn't actually done it yet. So I was always kind of like looking for stories and stuff. And I met this British graffiti artist who'd come there just to do graffiti. And so I thought, okay, well, this like sounds like a news story to me. So maybe I'll go out with this guy and, see what he has to see what that's like. So we went out, and he at the time was worried about getting like caught or arrested the same way that you would if you were a graffiti artist in the U.S. or the
just
the
in
West.
General, yeah.
Yeah, just in general. And so he's like, we have to do this after dark, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. But at the time, there was like no curfews or anything. But there was such a problem with crime and just instability at night. I mean, like at night, most of the time when you're going to sleep, like you'd hear these like pitched gun battles happening in the distance, or sometimes very close. So it was still like most Iraqis like have no desire to step outside their house. Like after probably at that time around like 6 or 7, the streets would start to clear. By like 8, there's a few stragglers, and then by like 9, it's just dead. So we went out at like 9 o'clock at night, and as we were approaching this kind of bombed out building that he wanted to paint, he starts to walk across his alley, and I decide to kind of stand back a few paces in case like the police come, I can slink away, so as he starts to approach the building, someone shouts at him, and he can't see who it is. And he doesn't speak Arabic, so he doesn't know what they're saying. So he decides, all right, I'm not gonna mess with this. So he decides that like he's just gonna turn around and walk away. So he starts to turn around, and at that point they just open fire. And
was it the police or local officials, or who?
We had no idea at that time. We had no idea. I mean, so at this point we thought it could be, there's a lot of problems with like crime and robbers and that sort of thing. And everyone had weapons, so you just had no idea. So the only thing that we knew is that we were out at night when mostly like either criminals or insurgents were out, and someone was shooting at us, and we didn't know who it was. So, it's not like you're going to walk up and try to sort things out at that point. Like it's too late. So we both of us, we take off running, and we kind of at one point think we're out of the way, and then we come out and we realize that they're on top of a building, and we're right under them, and they just kind of start raining down gunfire, and we manage to kind of get into this alley, and we're like almost, if we can just make it to the end of this alley, we know that we'll get to an area where there's probably going to still be like a few taxis or like cars, like people that could help. And like just as we're almost the end of the alley, like the gunfire is like getting a little bit further behind, and like we're almost safe. And these two guys like kind of look over their shoulder from like the end of the alley where we're trying to get to, and they see, these two guys just kind of sprinting, like a bunch of gunfire behind us, and they're like, oh, okay, like this is not right. So they stand up, and they pull these AK-47s, and they start yelling for us to get on the ground. And at this point, like these are two guys in like kind of sweatsuits, like track suits or something, and with assault rifles. And again, you have no idea who this is.
Did you understand the conversation that was going on because of you spoke Arabic, or you didn't speak Arabic at this time?
At that point, it was a conversation that kind of transcended language. I think when someone points a gun at you and starts shouting under those situations, like it just doesn't matter.
You're like, I can't translate this. I gotta run. Yeah,
it's just like basically the international sign has been put out there that you need to stop
and get away.
So we stopped, and one of them starts telling us to get on the ground. So we start to get on the ground. The other one starts panicking and shouting for us to stand up. And eventually we end up like face down in this back alley in Baghdad. And it was like this terrifying moment. This is like the first time in my life anything had happened. I was a junior in college, and, and so I thought, oh man, like really, I can't believe it. It's kind of like that moment in A Christmas Story when Ralphie like finally gets like the BB gun, and then he like shoots his eye out. I guess it breaks his glasses. And I was like, so many people like told me I'm going to go to Iraq and I'm going to die, and like here I am face down in like a back alley in Baghdad with a couple of guys in tracksuits standing over me with assault rifles. Like this is like, and
you just hear that echo. You're going to shoot your eye out, kid.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, oh, this is awful. And there was this moment where the guy I was with was like directly behind me, and I was a little bit ahead of him. And I turned to kind of, see what was happening with him. And this guy puts his boot in the back of my head. And then like I hear two quick gunshots behind me. And I thought like, fuck, they've like executed my friend. And, this is it. And thankfully, I realized that they were just signaling someone by firing in the air or something. There's so much gunfire in the air. I don't know how that's like an effective signal, but that's what they were doing. And so it turns out what had happened was that this bombed out building he wanted to paint was in the financial district of Baghdad, or this is an area where there was like a lot of banks, and there'd been like a lot of attempted robberies in the past couple months. So, at that time, like an attempted robbery is not like someone comes in and like pulls a gun and they're wearing like a clown mask and they say like put the money in the bag. It means that at that time it meant that you were going to have like a militia of dozens of people heavily armed come and storm the bank with the understanding that like half of them are going to die, but the other half are going to come away with thousands of dollars. So it was like, they did not take the idea of an attempted robbery lightly. So we kind of explain, and everyone's like, oh, okay, yeah, great, no problem. Yeah, that makes sense. Like,
no problem.
Yeah, like a couple of like, white guys probably are not going to rob our bank. Like, no problem. And so we're like, okay, well, we'll get on our way, and we'll see you later. And they're like, ooh, yeah, about that. Like, you can't go. And they end up holding us, and they say that it's for our own safety. But eventually, like, it comes out that, they just weren't going to let us go. And so finally, we stay the night, and in the morning, they gave us over to the police. And initially we thought, oh, they're going to let us go in the morning, but no, like, they gave us to the police. And then we went to a couple of different police stations, and finally they locked us up in a cell. And, at one point, this police officer comes and he says, like, all right, I'm going to go to your trial now, and we'll get this all sorted out. And we're like, okay, great, go talk to the judge. And he's like, no, don't worry about it, you guys just stay here, and like I'll go to the trial for you. And we're like, oh, we'd like to be present at the trial. It's not too much. And he's like, no, it's fine, you just stay here. And then, like, thankfully for us, I guess the judge was gone or something. But
he was having tea and crumpets.
Yeah, something. Yeah,
and sweet.
Yeah, so he's like, oh, we'll deal with this later. And so we'd stay for a while, and like at one point, they were going to put us in like kind of like the equivalent of like a drunk tank, like a mass holding cell. And
Uh-huh.
like there's like one little window, and there's like the whole cell was probably meant to like comfortably hold like maybe 5 people, but there's like, more than a dozen just crammed into this thing. And they see like these two Westerners come, so they're all like beckoning to us, like, go, in there. And we're like, oh God, this is going to be like all the pretty horses or something. We're just going to be in there like back to back fighting for our life. And like, thankfully for us, they like, I don't know where they put these other like detainees, but they moved them. And so we ended up having this whole like mass cell to ourselves. And like we didn't know how long we were going to be in there, so we're like, well, let's clean this, we'll at least have like a morale boost. And so we're cleaning it, and as we're cleaning it, we're finding like we found like a homemade kind of like shiv or something. And so it was we were really glad that it was just the two of us in there. But so what ends up happening is that they at one point we stayed another night, and at one point they kept wanting to see my passport. And I said, well, I've left it in the hotel. I did that in case, we got robbed. We were going out after night, after dark, and I didn't want to risk losing my passport. So this guy says, okay, like, and eventually I ended up kind of talking him into saying, okay, I'll take me back to my hotel and I'll get my passport and we can work it out that way. And, so they said, okay, so we go back, and it turns out that there was a group that stayed in this kind of like shanty hotel where we were staying. And it was like this. Have you ever heard of like Clowns Without Borders?
I haven't.
It's kind of like
I've
doctors.
heard of Comics Without Borders.
Sure, same sort of concept, like Comics Without Borders, Doctors Without Borders, Clowns Without Borders, where there's these clowns, and they travel to like war-torn places and perform for children. So this was kind of like not the Clowns Without Borders, but some kind of like offshoot. So one of the clowns who was staying in the hotel was leaving. So there was like this big going away party. So like I came in, and I have this police escort, and I've been missing for a couple of days. And they're like, what is going on? This is crazy. So they're like, all right, like, I get my passport, and then they take me back to the hotel, or to the prison, and the clowns all followed us back. And at that point, like, the clowns start talking to the police, and they're like, what's going on here? And it came out that we were being held for, I had a really long beard at the time. That's relevant. And so the charges at minor level started at, they said that we were loitering, and then they said that we were breaking a non-existent curfew. Then they said we were generally suspicious. Then they accused us of attempted bank robbery. Then they claimed that we shot back at the guards, like that we sent, and then we somehow like disposed of the weapon. And then they claimed that I was Al Qaeda because I had that beard. And the guy and then the guy that I was working with, he was going to go to the West Bank afterwards, and they use Israeli currency there, and a friend of his had given him like 100 shekel note. It's like, oh yeah, I didn't use this when I was there. Take this and spend it. And so at one point they searched us, and they'd found this 100 shekel note. So they accused him of being Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. So it was like this crazy accusation where you'd have like Al Qaeda like work with Israeli intelligence, which is like you'd have to be like the craziest Brotherhood of Man like operation ever, where you have like the two groups who like hate each other more than any two possible groups you can think of, like somehow working together for like some nefarious cause in Baghdad. That was what they had cooked up in their mind.
And this is why you don't spray paint.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that was the craziest part of all. So eventually they level these crazy charges, and the next day, thankfully, because these clowns came, they let us out, and the next day, because otherwise. Now,
were these clowns, just to make the story, I don't know, more outrageous or hilarious or just regular, were these clowns? They were there to cheer up the kids or whatever. Were they dressed clowny? Like, were they in?
They were not dressed as clowns at the time.
Okay.
They were in their civilian clothes.
I just had this image in my mind when you said clowns, and and you with a beard and being accused of everything you were accused of, and then these clowns coming to the rescue that were in clown makeup.
They brought their like juggling equipment, and they were like juggling and putting on a show for the police. The police loved it. They were like clapping, and like they loved the juggling act. So they did juggle, but they weren't wearing like makeup or anything.
Okay. Just to make the story a little bit more outrageous.
Yeah, no. So, but it was, but it really worked out because before that, like nobody had wanted to make a decision about what to do with us because, kind of like going back to like Saddam mentality, if someone had let us go and we were someone that should have been detained, like they would have ended up in prison. Or if they kept us, in prison and we shouldn't have been in prison, like they would have gone into prison as well. So that's why we had changed hands a lot, and no one really wanted to make a decision about what to do with us.
So basically they were playing a huge game of telephone with you guys, switching off, and the story kept getting more and more elaborate.
Yeah, exactly. And so, at the time there weren't phones in Baghdad, so like no one could call like the embassy or anything, so it was very easy to just kind of disappear and not have anyone accountable for us. So what having those clowns did for us was it made them realize that, okay, the outside world now knows about these two and we can't just indefinitely hold them. So they, the next morning they took us and they let us go. But the crazy part is that they actually really didn't care about the spray painting because we went back a day or two later.
They didn't, or they did? They
did not, because a day or two after we got out of prison, we went back in the middle of day, like broad daylight when people were out and stuff, and found someone and were like, hey, this guy wants to paint on your wall. And it was like this building that was completely trashed. It had been bombed by the Americans in the initial, shock and awe campaign. So it wasn't like it was, anyone was going to live there or do something with it. And, so they, we asked some guys from the position where they were shooting at us. We said, we're going to go paint on this wall. Do you care? And the guy said, oh, no, it's fine. Go ahead.
And so you could have actually just done it in the daytime.
Yeah, exactly. And they actually were helping because he was like, this guy was like a stencil graffiti artist or something. So they were like helping him like hold the stencils in place and like helping him put it up. So yeah, there was no need for any of that.
That is actually a really funny story. You were rescued by clowns, by the way, which is the highlight of the story to me. And I will imagine the clowns wearing their clown makeup and a squeaky nose because it makes this crazy story even funnier. How different is what you see over there and what you see in the mainstream media? How slanted is the mainstream news about Syria, Iraq, Yemen, all the things that are going on over there?
Well, I am the mainstream media, so I make it all up. It's just no, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess you can, I write for the Christian Science Monitor. Not a lot of people write that, but I guess that would be mainstream media compared to like, I don't know, the blogosphere or something. But I do write for like USA Today and The Guardian and Times of London, other fairly large papers. And, and certainly I work closely with, I know people at the New York Times or LA Times or all the big papers. So, I do think it's one of those things that I hear a lot where people will say like, oh, there's some kind of like big cover up, like you guys aren't like telling us the whole story. And I mean, to me, it's really ridiculous. I will say with the caveat that like I've since being back in the U.S. for a little while, I've watched like CNN and Fox and those things, and that's awful. However, it's like your choice to watch Fox or CNN, so I don't really have a lot of sympathy for people that want to watch.
That's more what I was considering when I say the mainstream, because me, for example, I am from New Orleans, and I was in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, and what was being shown compared to what was actually happening was very distorted. And then also our mutual friend Yoshi, I was on his podcast when he was interviewing friends in Crimea, and they were saying that what was being represented in the mainstream media and on the news regarding Crimea and the Ukraine and Russia was very slanted towards American politics.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say like when people complain to me about like TV news, specifically like, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, whatever their like, slant is, left or right. I mean, the coverage is awful. Like there's no question about that. Um, and and I think the problem is that it's not news. It's not people going out and saying like, okay, what's happening? Let's get people on the ground and talk to them. No, it's like they bring on these pundits and talking heads. And I mean, it's awful. Like, I don't know why anyone would watch that. In the same breath, though, I'll say that complaining about that there's somehow no good news because TV news stinks. It's like someone saying like, oh, I can't find anything good to watch on TV, and then you find out that they got their TV got stuck on like Lifetime and they lost their remote and they haven't changed the channel. It's awful. I don't understand why you would like find like the worst possible source for your news and then refuse to only watch that when you could, like NPR has excellent coverage. I think certainly I'm biased to say that most newspapers have fairly decent coverage. And when I say that, I mean, I'm not saying that, they get everything right all the time or, there's never an instance where there's, someone without bias or this or that. I guess what I'm saying is that they go out and they put together what's happening in a place and present it as clear a picture as they can. If you look at a situation like Syria or, some of the conflicts that are happening in the Middle East, it can be difficult sometimes to get on the ground and get a complete picture of what's happening. Or like in Afghanistan, I think a lot of people really did have kind of a pro-U.S. slant, and they didn't talk to Afghans enough. You saw a lot of reporters going and doing like embeds with the U.S. military, but then really not giving Afghans the same level of attention. And that does happen, but I don't think there's like, you don't think it's like a mainstream conspiracy or something where people are not getting the information. You just think that the CNN, MSNBC, those media outlets are not doing good reporting, basically. Well, I mean, this is the other place where I get very critical is that what CNN and, what any news outlet does now is they are for-profit organizations and they are responding to market demands. If CNN was really so awful that like no one ever wanted to watch it and like their ratings tanked, they would change and they would respond to market demands. If people were saying, we want smart, incisive, on-the-ground reporting, they would deliver that, but they're not. I would venture to say that, you and most people listening to this podcast have probably not paid for news in recent memory. And it's really expensive to go get, not just international news, but domestic news. Right now I'm talking to you from the Southwest, and I'm doing like a long-term investigative project that deals with drug violence. And it's really expensive to be out in these places. It's not like I'm running up huge bills, but certainly like I need to have income and, housing, car, gas. All that stuff is not free. So I really am not terribly sympathetic for people that don't want to pay for news, and yet they somehow think that magically news organizations are just going to have these magic budgets that come from, I don't know where, that will provide like really good on the ground reporting. There's only so much you can do if you're operating on a shoestring budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there has been a shift, like you said, to corporatize media as far as those TV outlets are concerned. I don't know if you were a Walter Cronkite fan or if you watched any of those shows growing up, but there was, I guess, a lot of older generation, I know people I've talked to are kind of outraged with the sort of MTV style editing and all the ads and all of the sponsorships, and they kind of see the fake news because there was more of a code of ethics, I think, as we know, when there was only 3 news channels, the 3 networks.
Well, and yeah, I mean, but I think there's still, journalists still have, ethical codes that we have to operate by. But what's changed is that we can really see very clear. Well, I think there's 2 things. There's one, you can see much more clearly who's watching. It's much easier to get ratings, particularly if you're talking about the internet. You can see exactly how many
who's clicking on what,
who's clicking on what, how long they're staying there. Are they staying on the site after they read that story? You can see all of that. And then with also, the other big shift is kind of more of a philosophical shift, but I think there used to be this idea that news was a public service, and that it was something. It was like the fourth estate, or it was this public body, and there was an importance to it. And I don't know if people really have that attitude anymore. And now that, I mean, and when I say that no newspapers are not, are they're for-profit institutions, like it doesn't mean that, I think when you say that it's corporatized or something, it has kind of a negative connotation.
Well, there was actually a law, and I'm so upset that I'm blanking on it. I learned about it in communications class in college. There was a law like in the late 80s or early 90s. Do you know what I'm talking about? That used to make it so that you had to show the other side. It had to be completely ethical, and that law was actually revoked. I can't remember the name of it.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's necessary. Of all the problems that the media industry is facing, I don't think it's like, well, you're not showing the other side. And sometimes, I think there's a classic example if you're talking about like global warming coverage. This is not so much a problem anymore, but say 10 years ago, there was this idea that, okay, we have to, half of the story goes to this group, and then the other half goes to their opponents. Well, if you're talking about something like global warming, like, do you need to give global warming deniers, who are supported by 2% of scientists, the same amount of acreage in a news story that you do to like legitimate scientists? There's, so I think that most news outlets, if you look at them, unless you're talking about like, Fox or MSNBC, which have pretty clear, agendas or political leanings. You know what you're getting with either of those. If you go to the most of the newspapers, outside of their opinion pages, it's pretty objective. They've talked to both sides. They get that stuff. Generally speaking, I think that the problem comes in where because because people don't pay for news, and there's no third party that's supporting these agencies, whether it's government funding or some kind of benevolent corporate donor. They have to operate like a business, and it's like an entertainment TV station. When it comes to their sitcom lineup, Fox or CBS, they're not going to keep airing shows that nobody watches. So you have to do the same if you're a news agency. If nobody is going to click on your like in-depth, thoughtful reporting on Iraq that costs $10,000 per week to produce, you probably aren't going to keep putting that out there. And it's not that there's some kind of cover up. It's just that you can't stay afloat if if you're not responding to consumer demand. So that's the conversation. If you go into any newsroom now, there's always this struggle of, okay, well, how do we, if you're, talking about your website, how do we get clicks or page views while still remaining relevant? I mean, because, some story about Justin Bieber or trashy celebrity news is always going to get more clicks than the kind of story that, exposes some sort of social injustice or is telling you about some important political issue du jour.
Tom, that makes me sad. I'm going to start crying right now.
Well, I think this is why most journalists are very depressed, cynical people.
I'm going to start crying right now because it's so true. Every single time I click on my Yahoo Mail, I see 10,000 Kim Kardashian things on the front cover. And what the funny thing is, last time I clicked on it on accident, actually, and I think there was about 1,000 comments, and I kind of got sucked in. I wasn't being a troll, but I went to the first 15 or 20 comments, and then I was like, I need to stop looking at this or my brain is going to explode. All of the comments were people saying, this is trash. Why are you reporting on this? Who cares about Kim Kardashian? Please stop putting this up here. And then every single time I go on my Yahoo front page, it's still another Kim Kardashian story. Yeah,
no, it's absolutely insane. Like, I mean, that's one of the things that has just blown me away. It's just that the appetite for it. And I'll admit, like, I'm just as guilty as many other people sometimes, where I'll get sucked into any number of trashy stories now and again. So I'm not like against covering, sometimes like if Justin Bieber got deported or something, I'd be all over that story. I'd love it. Like I'd want 24/7 coverage of that. But
Oh, poor Justin
I
Bieber.
think I think it's just about news consumption is just about having balance. So you know, if consumers aren't going to do it themselves and say like, okay, well, I need to, I can indulge in my trashy celebrity news or whatever it is. Everyone has their vice, while also keeping up on, relevant news and, and other serious topics. Then we need to, as a society, I would say, we need to come up with a way to support news because what you're seeing now, what makes you skeptical of the mainstream media and so many other people that I talk to, is what happens when you basically leave news agencies to respond to market demands. I mean, the sad truth is the market does not demand quality, insightful news on important issues. But there's always a demand for really trashy stuff.
That's so sad. Okay. Well, not to bring the podcast to a screeching sad halt, guys, remember he was saved by clowns. I want to know what I read the little blurb that you sent to me about, your kidnapping in Men's Journal, and I'd love the listeners to hear what you're going out there, you're going into these dangerous areas, and like you said, you're putting out all these expenses. What are the other, I guess, expenses that freelance journalists are having to pay by doing these stories? Is your personal life suffering? Is is it just hard getting these stories and you're always on the move? What are the prices that you're paid to bring this quality programming and quality news stories, to people out there?
Well, I mean, the sad thing is that the numbers really aren't that big if you're talking about it from the standpoint of a corporation or like a large organization. But for an individual, it can be overwhelming. So maybe an easy way to break it down would be to look at my expenses when I was in Afghanistan. And there I had to work with, a guy who was the translator. Even let's say I was going to take all the time to learn Dari. They also speak Pashto, which is a completely different language. So you're probably going to need some translator. So I had a guy who worked with me full time, and that, and then other kind of expenses would be about $1,000 a month. Then I had living expenses. I kind of hustled and worked it out. So I managed a house, which alleviated my housing costs, but had it not been for that, to rent a room in Afghanistan at that time, you were looking at paying like a minimum of probably like $750 to $1,000 a month.
Is it that much over there? Because I'm thinking that it's an impoverished country.
Well, certainly that's not what Afghans are paying, but that would...
Are you getting the white guy discount?
Yeah, no, it's... So
you need to grow your beard out, Tom.
Well, so what ends up happening is that the UN has really driven up, UN and I guess like NGOs and foreign NGOs have driven up housing prices over there. So if you want to live in a place that has like electricity all of the time, that like won't leak and have problems and when it starts to snow and get cold in the winter, and that it has like adequate security and not like your house is going to get attacked by insurgents, that probably won't happen, but like thieves and stuff would be a big problem if you didn't have a house with a nice wall and locks and all of those things. So
what I'm hearing is that I need to invest in real estate in Afghanistan.
Oh, that bubble is burst. that unfortunately you're a few years too late, but if this was 2005, I would tell you to get all over that. But yeah, so I mean, I would say in Afghanistan, an average freelance correspondent could look at spending, let's say we'll go a soft estimate would be $1,500 a month. But then if you look at what they get paid, I was very fortunate and had a contract, so I got roughly probably about $2,000 to $3,000 a month. But I would lose about a third of that in overhead.
Do you think that there's journalists out there who are just not making money? Like they're going out there doing the work and they're just broke?
Well, do you think there are comedians out there who are going broke? I mean, yeah, of course. Yeah. No, yeah. I would say, I mean, I have tons of, I could give you a long list of people that, have gone broke, or well, oftentimes what happens is people will come in and do it for a year or two, and they just kind of get worn down from not making money, and just living a really uncomfortable lifestyle. And aside from that, like, especially if you're doing the international stuff, it's very difficult to have a personal life. And so, aside from being separated from your friends and family, you're probably not going to have a very fulfilling, like, dating life, anything like that. So it
takes a toll.
Yeah, it takes a toll, and it pays very little. I mean, I think, for most people, it's really not worth it. I think people have a very glamorous idea of what it is to be a foreign correspondent, but at my lowest when I was starting out, I would ration. I was in the West Bank at the time, and I would ration like $2 a day. I didn't even have a phone. I'd have to go to like a payphone to make my calls and stuff. So people couldn't call me back. If they wanted to call me back, I'd have to say like, "Oh, I'm sorry, there's a problem with my phone. It's broken. I'll call you at a designated time." But so I have $2 a day that I would live on for everything, and that would, I was like staying on a friend's couch, and I'd leave the house every day with, like 8 shekels, and that was it. And like there was one day where I was like, okay, I had enough left to either buy like lunch, like a little like sandwich, or like a jar of Vaseline, which I could use to like masturbate for like a month plus. And I was like, okay, you know what? Like, I am thinking long term. Like, I can go a day without food, but like I may as well like have some very luxurious, like lubricated masturbation. And so like I went back and bought that jar of Vaseline. Like again.
Tom, it totally sounds like the life of a lonely stand-up comedian, and people wonder why. People wonder why there's not that many women in journalism, that type of journalism and stand-up, and this is the reason why. Well, Tom, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. And where can we find you? Where can we read your stuff? Where can people from Out of the Box get to know more about Tom Peter?
Well, I've got an archive of all my stuff, and on my own website, tomapeter.com. Occasionally, once a month or so, I tweet at Tom A. Peter. But I post all the stuff. I work for different papers, so just tomapeter.com if you're interested, and you can see whatever it is I'm working on up there.
Okay, well, thanks for being on Out of the Box, guys. You've been listening to Out of the Box with Rosie Tran. Out of the Box is sponsored by hugmetease.com. Spread love, give a hug, hugmetease.com. Don't forget to visit outoftheboxpodcast.com and click on the support button. Use one of our affiliates and we get a little kickback. And also, please go on Stitcher, iTunes, and SoundCloud and subscribe, follow us, leave a comment. It helps us out a lot. You've been listening to Out of the Box with Rosie Tran.